Whenever sound flows through a pipe, bouncing from end to end, it forms a standing wave. Now, a standing wave is just a repeating motion through a medium confined to a particular space. And in the case of flute physics, the amplitude, frequency, and shape of that sound wave are defined by the space in which it's confined. To explain how that space defines the waves that can inhabit it, let's take a look at the simplest possible standing wave that you can have inside of a pipe. To start off, let's imagine air as a fluid substance that is compressible but wants to be evenly spaced. Naturally, with these properties, air will move from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. But once air starts flowing, because it has inertia, it'll keep flowing until something stops it. So naturally what you get is air flows from areas of high pressure to low pressure, but it keeps going, and it overcompensates until the areas of high pressure become areas of low pressure, and it just goes back and forth like a swing. This is especially true in the case of pipes, in which because there are no ways outside or inside of the pipe except for open ends, air will take a certain amount of time to flow inside and outside the pipe. In this example, the spheres represent the position of the air as it flows inside and outside the pipe. Now, if this were totally accurate, there would be spheres all around the pipe to keep an even pressure, but that would be visually confusing, so right now I'm just focusing on the air inside and immediately outside the pipe. So basically what's happening here is that the air inside the pipe is expanding and contracting, moving from high pressure to low pressure and back and forth. Since both ends are open, the air takes all available routes to try to equalize its pressure. But what if you close off one of the ends? What you end up with in this case is a wave that takes twice as long to cycle back and forth because the air has to travel twice the distance to move in and out of the pipe. Now what's interesting about this is you can take two of these closed pipes that are half as long and put them back to back, and essentially you have the same thing that we had to start out with. So that means that you can put a wall right in the middle of an open pipe and it'll act the same, right? Well, this is where things get complicated. Let's talk about what a sound wave is. A sound wave is a change in pressure over time, but it's also a change in pressure over distance. If you could freeze time and look around in a noisy room, you would notice that there are certain areas of high pressure and certain areas of low pressure. Now the speed of sound is constant, but the distance between these areas may vary because the time it takes for a sound wave to go between high pressure and low pressure, which is known as frequency, can change, and thus the distance that it takes to go between high pressure and low pressure, known as wavelength, can also change. In every standing wave, there are places where the air doesn't move at all, and places where the air moves the most. The places where the air doesn't move are called nodes, and the places where the air moves the most are called antinodes. In a typical standing wave, antinodes are spaced halfway between nodes. And even though nodes are the place where the air moves the least, the pressure changes the most at the nodes, and the pressure changes the least at the antinodes. To determine the wavelength of a wave like this, you need to count either two nodes or two antinodes, because every antinode alternates direction from the one that was previous, and what you're looking for is a place in one wave that is exactly the same as a place in another wave, and count the distance between those two places. So how do you determine the wavelength of the wave that's inside this pipe? Well, it's hard, because you can't tell exactly where the antinodes are just by looking at the animation. But let me give you a rule of thumb to work with here, which is that antinodes always occur at open ends of a pipe. So with that information, you can deduce that since this pipe has an antinode at both ends and a node in the middle, it must contain half a wavelength. If this pipe had a whole wavelength inside it, or a whole number of wavelengths, the air would be moving the same direction at both ends of the pipe. In this case, since there's already no motion in the center of the pipe, you can put a wall there and convert it to two closed pipes of half length, and it'll act the same. But this isn't the only wave that you could put inside this pipe. because the only restrictions on what kind of waves can exist in certain pipes are that wherever you have an open end, you have to have an antinode, and wherever you have a closed end, you have to have a node. So that actually leaves you with an infinite number of options. But not all of those options work in a closed-ended pipe. Take this one, for example. It has antinodes at both ends, as well as an antinode in the middle, and nodes partway down each side. You couldn't put a wall in the middle of this one because you would be blocking an antinode. But if you create a standing wave with one more node in that same pipe, the node falls in the middle, and so you can put a divider in the middle of that one. You might have noticed a pattern here, which is that standing waves with an odd number of nodes on the inside of the pipe can be split in half, while standing waves with an even number cannot. This means that an open pipe can host a standing wave inside of it that contains half a wavelength, one whole wavelength, 1.5 wavelengths, and so on, any multiple of half a wavelength, while a closed pipe is constrained to hosting any wave that contains an odd-numbered multiple of 1/4 of a wavelength inside the pipe. If you want to restrict which standing waves a certain pipe can host, then you can create a hole where you want an antinode to be. This is because the antinode is the only part of a standing wave that doesn't change pressure. If there was a change in pressure inside and outside of that hole, there would be flow that would disrupt your standing wave. So basically what you're doing is you're filtering out all the standing waves that don't have an antinode at that exact location. Once you understand which standing waves are available to a certain pipe, you can take this into account with designing musical instruments.